Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific review, of course, from the 1.25 patch in GT Sport, and this is a slightly different occasion to when we last looked at this car, which of course was in GT6, the Abarth Biposto Bertone 1500 Bat 1, one of the most ridiculous names in the whole game. But last time when we looked at this car, it was in high rollers, because very specifically that series is for classic cars which have huge prices, generally speaking around 3 million or more. Now though, this one has had a massive price drop, of course, in an ironically opposite way to the Daytona Cobra, which has gone from about 4.5 million, of course, up to 15. This one has dropped from 3.5 down to 1, which is still a lot. 6 figures for an N100 car is a lot, no matter what way you look at it, but at the same time, that's a whole lot more accessible than it was. And in a similar way to the Alfa Romeo TZ2, which was, I believe, 10 million credits, if I recall correctly, in GT6, this and that Alfa Romeo were, of all of the most expensive ones, the two that tended to get bought the least, basically. The two that you would very, very rarely see used by the community, be it in racing or in cruises. And whenever I pulled out one of those two cars on, for instance, Sierra or the Nordschleifer, they would always be popular. People would crowd around it and check out the car because so few people actually bothered to buy them. Now though, the tables have turned, because it's so much more accessible, and I would say that this car has benefited in an all-round sense because of the new N-Class rating system. Because before, of course, when it was performance points, you could tune this car up to a decent level. It was, what, 260 horsepower, something like that, but it still wasn't all that quick. It was actually similar to another car which I loved in Gran Turismo 6, the Prince Skyline, the BLRA-3, which was a 6-figure Skyline, classic one from the early 60s. You could tune it up to like 470 pp or something like that, but it wasn't great. It wasn't great. In fact, it was much more of a cruiser, just like this car is as well, and when you see the spec sheet, that's not a surprise. It's only got a 1.5 litre naturally aspirated engine, and it's got the kind of specs that you would typically expect from something like a small hatchback or a K car. 73 horsepower, 74 pound-feet of torque, 870 kilos. They're very small numbers across the board. The horsepower per tonne is only 84. So when you're spending 1 million credits on a car like that, well, of course, it's not ideal, or at least it doesn't sound ideal from a racing point of view, but does it have potential? Well, as I alluded to just now, it does. I would say more potential for racing now because of a combination of those two things. Not only is the classification of N instead of performance points far more relevant to a car like this, but because it's less than a third of the price of what it was, it's that much more accessible. So really that combination of two things I think is going to make this car far more popular in GT Sport than it ever was in the franchise before, and I think that's a great thing, because as much as I love the unsung heroes, both of course in the real world and in the games as well, it is nice when people actually get to appreciate those cars more. Stuff like the Daihatsu Storia as well. That's of course my personal favourite sleeper of the whole franchise. When people actually realise, wait a second, this car is great. That's always a cool thing. Now, a word of warning, don't expect this to be like a sleeper of any kind. It's not a sleeper car. For one thing, it stands out like a sore thumb, but it's not a dominant car. Even when you fully tune it, it's got less than 200 horsepower, so don't expect this thing to rock your world, but it can, in N100, be a useful car. So, as you saw earlier on today, for instance, with my tune setup, you can use it for that if you so choose, but it's not a dominant N100 car. It's not as quick as some of the others. Something like a Peugeot RCZ could give it a great battle, or even more so the Honda S660, and doubtless a couple of others. Something like the Alpine, for instance, as well, the classic. But against cars with similar numbers to begin with, stuff like some of the older K cars, the Copan, the Beat, maybe a couple of the hot hatches, certainly something like a Beetle or a Samba bus, it goes without saying, but they're not great rivals anyway, or the Fiat 500, it can rival those cars. So for those who want a really oddball collector's piece or a slower classic to actually get some real racing out of it instead of just Group X, limited to those 3 career mode races or the occasional custom event, this is a pretty good one to go for. It's not as affordable as something like a Pantera or the classic Corvette, for instance. There are others which could be better options, but if you're looking to buy something that, as I said, has that collector appeal, or if you're just like me and many of you guys and enjoy the oddball and the different and the unique and the crazy to some degree, then sure, check it out. It's a charming little car, it's a pretty good drifter. The attention to detail was already great on this car. In GT6 it looked really good. It does now as well, so it's kind of a quirk as far as the car lineup goes. It's in a relatively shallow place as far as rivals go. If you're talking direct rivals, classic slow cars with that kind of price tag, there's not exactly a huge amount of them, but for something that's completely different, it's pretty much perfect. It's 1,000,000 credits for a car with K-car performance. So if that appeals to you, then by all means go for it. It certainly appeals to me, and I would have bought it if it were 3.5 million anyway. I mean, of course I would. I'm planning on reviewing every car in the game anyway, so I would have done that even if it was 20 million, even though I wouldn't have liked it. But the fact that it is reduced is great. Just like the LMP cars dropping in price, it makes it all the more accessible. So if you haven't tried it out yet, it does not take that long to earn 1,000,000 credits. Even if you don't go on Blue Moon Bay, you can still find other ways of getting that money very quickly. But of course, if you do want to run Blue Moon Bay with something like a Porsche in N400 or the KTM in N300, you can literally earn this car in 3 races. That's half an hour. 1,000,000 credits in half an hour, you've got yourself this car. It really isn't difficult. So if you want to check it out, I would say it's worth your time. An interesting little oddball. But that's it for this pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.